Hello, I'm Imara Jones, host of The Last Sip on FSTV, but today I am at Netroots talking to a whole array of people who are leaders across a number of fields, whether or not it be political, at the community grassroots level, or the leaders of nonprofits. And right now we are happy to talk to Aimee Allison, who is the president of Democracy in Color, a nonprofit that focuses on centering people of color, especially women of color, in politics. So she is on trend.
On trend, on fleek.
You're leading the trend.
Yes.
You're leading the trend.
Yes.
Now, today, can you talk about, before we sort of go into the nuts and bolts of all of the nerd political stuff, which is what everyone talks about here, can we first start out by talking about a new initiative that you announced today that is focused on, again, putting women of color at the heart of progressive politics?
Yes, it's called She the People. And She the People is launching with the first ever Women of Color in Politics Summit in San Francisco on September 20th. You might wonder why we need that right now. It's because women of color are the most progressive voters in the nation. And black women came on the scene and bubbled up to the awareness of Democrats and progressives in general after the stunning election results in Alabama, where, for the first time in 25 years, a Democratic senator won that state in the Deep South. But that victory was a combination of factors that are not usually acknowledged. One, it was separate from the Democrats, who typically ignore the black electorate. A black woman, Dwana Thompson, along with LaTosha Brown, led independent campaigns to reach out to black people, particularly black women in that state. And only 28% of the population, high voter turnout, particularly among black women, won that state. And it opened up political possibilities. The second is that we have strategists who are on the ground who Democrats everywhere need to follow. The second is that, and a recognition as progressive voters and strategists, we actually need inspirational leaders. And so She the People is about elevating this whole new crop of unabashedly progressive, community-minded, approachable leaders who are running in state legislatures and for Congress. People like Rashida Tlaib, who's running out of Detroit for John Conyers' old seat. People like Deb Haaland, who would be the first Native Congresswoman in New Mexico. These leaders matter, and they represent a new kind of politic. And so She the People is saying, look, if you want to win, focus, invest, and elevate and follow the wisdom, the heart, and the vision of women of color. Because truly, it's not just women of color that will win, it's women of color leading a multiracial coalition. So it's really, at its core, about saying, how do we recast a multiracial progressive coalition that can win? And She the People puts women of color rightly at the front of all that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you talk about how women of color are leading these sort of transracial, interethnic coalitions. And it reminds me of something that I heard Brittany Cooper say, who's a black woman sociologist, in one of her books. And she said the reason why, she says, we need to trust black women. And the reason why people need to trust black women is because black women are the only people in this country that don't want to replicate the power of white men, want to build a completely different way of power and power structure. And so I think that's just an interesting perspective that you're seeing borne out in the way that you're talking about people organized.
Well, my experience is that among Latinos, Latinas, and among Asian Americans, Native women, and Arab Americans, we have that same sensibility. If we look at women of color in total, our vote eligible populations, like up since 2010, 70% compared to 6% for white women. So we have the numbers, but we also have that sensibility. I did a panel today, which you saw, called Hidden Figures, how women of color are making history in the midterms. And the reason I had all of this, a multiracial set of our top political strategists who are elevating this multiracial coalition, is because I need people to see it's not just black women, but it is a multiracial set of women of color in total that are this progressive force. And that I would just say, for what Brittany Cooper's observation is, it also applies to other people who are people of color, women of color, who find themselves the most dehumanized, the most oppressed group, who are close to the problem and have a really good sense of what the solution is from there. So.
And on that point, I mean, a race which Doug Jones is important. He's a candidate where black women made the pivotal tip, but he's also a traditional candidate, Democratic candidate in a lot of ways. But then if we go right next door to the state of Georgia, a great example of what you're talking about is Stacey Abrams, right? Because she represents this new type of candidate, and the people that she brought to the polls are at the heart of the party. So you've been very passionate about her.
Yes.
And you've been very passionate about making sure that she got elected in order to underscore some of the things that you are talking about. So I'm wondering, when you went back and looked at the results from that race, what stood out for you, and what overperformed, if at all, what you had anticipated?
Yeah, you got to remember, a year ago, Stacey Abrams, according to all the powers that be, wasn't electable. Here you got a woman who was the House Minority Leader in Georgia, who had a national set of supporters and donors, but hadn't risen to national prominence. And the state party recruited someone, a white moderate millionaire, to run against her, also named Stacey. Oh my goodness, what a mess. They didn't believe that a black person, a Democrat, could win statewide. And it's very cynical, because white Democrats have been losing statewide for 10 years. 10 years, including Jimmy Carter's grandson, Jason Carter. Okay, so we gotta tell the truth about this stuff. Stacey Abrams is so important because, one, she's a phenomenal candidate herself, just brilliant, highly overqualified, okay, like most black women for the job. She's also a progressive who has a vision in the Deep South. This is what a Southern progressive sounds like and looks like. But also the other aspects of this is the number of black women, 42%, who are part of the Democratic registered voters in that state. Nearly half of the voters in the Democratic primary were black women. So instead of running from her identity, she embraced it. She leaned into the base black women, which you say in Alabama, they were like, okay, black women have high turnout. But that was also true in New Jersey and Virginia. It's been true for decades. But in Georgia, this is an opportunity for a candidate to lean into the powerful base. And then the third aspect is they had black women at the head of a whole strategy to reach into the rural, suburban, urban parts of Georgia, talk to voters that have been talked about, and include more people in the process. So at the end of it, she swept all but 3 counties, right, in the primary. They brought in nearly 200,000 additional voters over 2014. Now there's still a vote gap. In order to win Georgia, you've got to get 215,000 additional voters, because Trump won that state, remember. But with this strategy, we're getting closer, because it's not, understand the swing voter, instead of chasing after a Trump supporter or a moderate white voter, they're the most unreliable for Democrats, and they're spending too many resources. Instead, what Stacey Abrams says is, I'm going after people of color who are unregistered but eligible, as well as turning out people who are most likely to vote for me. And that's the winning strategy. The primary showed who's going to win. The thing that people don't understand about the results in Georgia and how our demographics are changing is that there weren't just black strategists who knew the community who were running it. There were also API, Asian Pacific Islander, and Latinx strategists. And so the Latinx vote increased 4 times over 2014, and the API vote 6 times over 2014. It's a remarkable, remarkable development, and it shows the growth of this multiracial electorate, the new Democratic majority that can win Georgia. And what we want to do with that is say, this is a test case. If you fully invest in the new American majority, look what we can do in places like Florida, places like Arizona, places like Texas. We can win with that strategy all over, especially the South and Southwest, but in districts all over the country. So that's why I'm like, you could tell I'm super passionate about that, because I believe that's the future.
Right. I mean, it's also the fact that, like, you know, Republicans rely on the core of their core
right,
to win. Right. So they rely on turning out the core of their core in order to win. That's how
every time they insult a Mexican, every time they talk about an immigrant, they're throwing red meat to their, to get them to come out.
Right, but the thing is that the Democrats in the picture that you're painting don't do the same thing. They don't rely on the core of the core, because it's interesting, that's actually how a minority party stays in power, is that they over-index on their numbers by turning out their people.
Right.
So, and they haven't done that, the Democrats haven't done that. So when you're looking at what happens as a possible harbinger, when you look at all of the energy that you put on the stage today and where things are going, when you look ahead to November, what do you see and how are you feeling?
So the stuff in the strategy, new American majority strategy that's happening in Georgia is not the only place. And so what I think people need to watch is what's going on in Florida. And a set of Andrew Gillum is running, a African-American man in his early 40s running for governor, very progressive. And remember, the Republicans win in the state of Florida they won last time, less than 1% in a state of 10 million people, in a state that's majority black and brown, and in a state that's got 250,000 additional Puerto Ricans that have moved in.
Right.
There's groups on the ground, much like what's happening in Georgia, are hidden figures who are running strategy, new American majority strategies, and they are reaching black and brown voters in communities that both parties typically ignore. There are plenty of people, voters, to close that 1% gap and to win that state and turn that state blue. So remember, our swing voters are not red to blue. You didn't have to tell either. I can just project. You don't tell black women vote for Trump or vote for Clinton. That was ridiculous. We either voted for Clinton, we stayed home. Right. So the swing voter and the understanding of what's going on in places like Georgia or Florida is, our swing voter is from non-voter to voter. They are running a very serious ground campaign that's intended to expand the electorate. So I believe that Florida is going to turn blue. I believe we're going to have a Democrat that can win for governor. And remember, so we can win 2020 by winning now. We can win 2020 this year by expanding the electorate and then building permanent turnout operations so that we get our people to vote this year and next. And the other place to really keep an eye on is Arizona. Arizona is, my prediction, I said it here on Free Speech TV first, is going to turn blue. And here's how I know. Trump won that state by 120,000 votes or so. There's strategists on the ground led by Latina organizers in this organization called One Arizona that are registering and engaging Latino voters every day. And this year alone, they've registered over 200,000. They will, I predict, be able to overcome that because they have a very exciting progressive at the top of the ticket. That's David Garcia running for governor. So I'm just saying, when you have the electorate that's majority people of color,
right.
You have an exciting, inspirational, progressive candidates, and you have strategists who are expanding the electorate, voila, our democracy is saved. And that's what I think is going to happen in some of these key states.
So when you look ahead, so past November, one of the things that is a consistent complaint is that these data-driven examples of the way in which investing in the right places and mobilizing new people in places can ensure that the Democratic Party wins does not and has not broken through to the party establishment.
Oh, you can say that again.
And so how do you think that is possible? How is it possible to change the Democratic establishment to be more in line with what's actually happening and working on the ground?
We're not going to wait for the Democratic Party. Our plans, I can say for She the People, our plans are bigger than electing Democrats, because we have Democrats who are not working in our best interest. When the sharpest critic of Trump and Trump's policies on the border, which is the Congresswoman from California, Maxine Waters, is admonished by party leaders, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, take time out of their busy schedule to say, you got to be civil when they're locking babies up, it shows that the Democratic Party has not a clue about serving its base. And we're not going to wait for them to learn. the best way is for us, and everyone who is like, how can we win, is to elevate and support the efforts that expand the electorate and get young voters, which is another way of saying voters of color, and to elevate the strategists and to support the efforts that engage, register, or not stop wasting money on TV ads and stuff like that, but really do long-term infrastructure building. When we win, you notice I didn't say if, when we win Georgia, we win Florida, we win Arizona, and we win back the House, it will not be because of the Democrats. It will be because of the brilliance of the New American Majority strategy that continued despite what the party is doing. And the party, there is some indication that there is some level of investment, but it's not nearly enough. And the final thing I will say is black voters are 1 out of 4 Democrats are black, so 25% of the party registrants. And so 25% of the money is not going to engaging black voters.
Correct.
Huge, huge, huge mistake. And what hubris. And look at what 2016 got us. And so unless the progressive movement and the Democratic Party is willing to deeply invest in the most enthusiastic voters, black women first, and everybody else to build this coalition, they're not going to win. So we're at the position where we're not sitting back and educating, we're going forward, doing the work, and we plan to be successful in November.
Well, that's a great note on which to end this wide-ranging interview. I have more questions for you, but I actually will ask them when the cameras are off. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your leadership and for your vision, because we clearly need people who have vision at this moment. You have that. You have been dedicated to that over the past year, despite a lot of challenges, and it is bearing fruit. So I think that we all who need hope in this moment look to people like you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us here on Free Speech Television, FSTV, live from Netroots Nation. Stay tuned for much more.